My son asked me why the neighbors were standing in their yards at 2 in the morning, and I lied to him. I said they were probably just looking at the stars. He's 7. He believed me. But I'd been watching from the upstairs window for 40 minutes by then, and I can tell you that not one of those people was looking up. We'd been in Hargrove for 6 weeks when the first siren went off. My wife, Celia, had found the house online. 4 bedrooms, a porch that wrapped around 3 sides, a yard that backed up against 900 acres of mixed pine and hardwood in the foothills of the southern Blue Ridge. The listing price was so low I assumed something was wrong with the foundation. I called the realtor and asked her directly. She laughed and said, "No, honey, that's just Hargrove. People don't move here for the market value. They move here because it's quiet." We'd been in Charlotte for 11 years. Both of us remote now. Both of us tired of traffic that started at 6 and didn't stop until 8, of a school system that kept sending home surveys about our comfort level with armed resource officers. Celia wanted space. I wanted to stop grinding my jaw in my sleep. Our son, Nolan, wanted a dog. It seemed like the kind of place where all 3 of those things were possible. Hargrove is in Dawes County, North Carolina. Population 1,800 and change, according to the sign, though I'd revised that downward based on how few people I actually saw. 1 grocery store, a Family Dollar, a diner called Garland's that closed at 2 in the afternoon, and a volunteer fire department with an engine house that looked like it had been built in the 1970s and painted exactly once since. The town sits in a valley between 2 ridgelines, and the national forest starts where the last gravel road ends. The nearest city of any size is Asheville, which is an hour and 35 minutes if you're lucky with the mountain roads. The house was real. The quiet was real. We moved in on a Thursday in late September, and for the first 2 weeks I thought we'd made the best decision of our lives. Nolan started at Dawes County Elementary. The class had 14 kids. His teacher, Mrs. Fenton, emailed us the first week to say he was adjusting well and that he'd already made a friend named Colby whose family lived 2 roads over. Celia set up her drafting table in the sunroom and started taking on more freelance work than she'd had in a year. I converted the back bedroom into an office and fell into a rhythm: morning coffee on the porch, work until noon, a long walk in the afternoon while Nolan was still at school. I started sleeping through the night for the first time in years. The volunteer fire department was visible from the main road, a concrete block building with 2 bays, an American flag, and a siren mounted on a steel pole about 40 feet high. The siren was old, a Federal Signal Thunderbolt, the kind you see in civil defense photos from the Cold War. Big yellow horn arrangement on top, looking like a metal flower that had frozen mid-bloom. I noticed it on our first drive through town and pointed it out to Nolan, who said it looked like a robot trumpet. I told him it was for emergencies, fires, mostly. I wasn't wrong, exactly. The first time it went off was October 11th, a Wednesday, at 1:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I grabbed my phone off the nightstand the moment the sound hit me. It was not like any siren I'd heard before. I grew up in suburbs. I've heard tornado sirens, ambulance sirens, the test patterns they run on the first Tuesday of every month. This was different. It started low, a bass tone I felt in the floor, before I heard it in the air, and then climbed, but not smoothly. It pulsed. 3 seconds of rising tone, 2 seconds of silence, 3 seconds of rising tone, 2 seconds of silence, over and over. The frequency increased with each cycle until it was a high, thin sound that seemed to come from inside the walls rather than from the pole a quarter mile away. Celia sat up beside me. "What is that?" "Fire siren," I said. "That doesn't sound like a fire siren." She was right, but I didn't know what else to call it. It ran for 11 minutes. I timed it on my phone. 11 minutes of that rising, pulsing cycle, and then it stopped, not winding down, not fading. It stopped clean, like a switch had been thrown. I got out of bed and went to the window. Our bedroom faced the road, and from the second floor, I could see 4 houses in either direction. Every single one had at least one light on, but no one was outside. No cars moving, no flashing lights from a fire engine. The lights stayed on for maybe another 10 minutes, and then, house by house, they went dark again. Nolan slept through it. He sleeps like something buried. The next morning I asked at Garland's. I'd started going there for coffee a few times a week because the owner, Pete Garland, was the most talkative person in Hargrove and seemed glad to have someone new to talk to. "Heard the siren last night," I said. Pete was wiping the counter with a rag that looked older than me. "Yep." "Was there a fire?" "Nope." I waited. Pete kept wiping. "So, what was it?" He looked at me the way you look at a kid who asks why the sky is blue, not annoyed. Exactly, but aware that the real answer is longer than the question deserves. "They test it," he said, "every now and then. Keep it in working order. At 2 in the morning. Guess they figured nobody'd mind." I let it go, but on the way home I drove past the fire department, and the bay doors were closed and the parking lot was empty, and the siren on its pole looked exactly like it had the day we arrived. 11 days later, it went off again. Same time, not approximately the same time, 1:47 in the morning, 3-second rising pulse, 2-second silence, 11-minute duration, clean stop. This time, I went to the window immediately, and this time, I saw people. Not many. 5 or 6, spread across the houses I could see. They were standing in their front yards, dressed in whatever they slept in, and they were still. Not huddled, not talking to each other, not looking at phones, just standing, facing roughly the same direction east, toward the ridge where the national forest started. They stood for the full 11 minutes. When the siren stopped, they went inside. I told Celia what I'd seen. "Were they sleepwalking?" she asked. "All of them? At the same time?" "Maybe it's a thing here, like a tradition. Standing in your yard in your pajamas facing the woods is a tradition." She gave me the look she gives me when she thinks I'm winding myself up over nothing. "You wanted small-town life, Marcus. Small towns have weird stuff. Let it be weird." I tried. For about a week, I tried. Then I talked to Gil Torrance. Gil lived in the house directly across from ours. Retired, mid-60s, kept his yard like it was preparing for a magazine shoot. He'd brought us a plate of banana bread the day we moved in, and had been friendly in a careful, boundaried way, since the kind of neighbor who'd wave from his driveway, but never walk over uninvited. I caught him getting his mail and crossed the road. "Hey, Gil, quick question. The siren, is that on a schedule?" He sorted his envelopes, didn't look up. "Why?" "It's gone off twice since we moved in. Both times at the exact same time. Same duration. Just wondering if there's a pattern." "You're keeping track." My phone was right there, hard not to notice. He looked at me then. Not hostile, more like he was measuring something. "It goes off when it goes off," he said. "You'll get used to it." "Get used to what, exactly?" "The sound." He went inside. The third time was November 1st, 1:47, 11 minutes, pulsing climb, clean stop. And this time, I didn't just watch from the window. I got dressed, went downstairs, and opened the front door. The street was fuller than I expected. Not just 5 or 6 people. 15, maybe 20. In the stretch of road I could see. All standing. All facing the eastern ridge. Nobody spoke. Nobody looked at me. Even though I was the only person moving, stepping off my porch, walking to the edge of my yard, looking up and down the road with what must have been an obvious expression of confusion. The siren filled the valley like water filling a bowl. It didn't echo off the ridgelines, it seemed to settle between them, vibrating the air at a frequency that made my back teeth ache. The people in their yards didn't react to it. They stood in it like it was rain. When the siren stopped, they turned and went inside. The whole motion took about 30 seconds. No one hurried, no one lingered. I stood there in my yard for another 5 minutes, listening to the silence refill the space the siren had emptied, and then I went back in and sat at the kitchen table until the sun came up. That morning I didn't go to Garland's. I went to the fire department. The bay doors were open, and a man was hosing down the concrete floor. He was big 6'3", heavy through the shoulders, wearing a faded department t-shirt with Hargrove VFD on the back. He saw me and shut off the hose. "Help you?" "I'm Marcus Dane. My family moved into the Stowell house on Ridgecrest about 6 weeks ago." "Know the one? I'm Burl Ayres, chief for what that's worth." He said it with a half smile that suggested the title didn't come with much. "I wanted to ask about the siren." His face didn't change. "What about it?" "It's gone off 3 times since we moved in, always the same time, same duration, no fire response afterward, and the last 2 times, I've seen people standing in their yards while it runs." Burl coiled the hose around his forearm with a slow, practiced motion. "You came all the way down here to tell me people stand in their yards?" "I came to ask what the siren means." "It means what sirens mean. It's a warning." "Of what?" "Whatever needs warning about." "That's not an answer." He hung the hose on a hook inside the bay, took his time with it. Then he turned back to me and said, "Mr. Dane, I've lived here my whole life. My daddy was chief before me, and his daddy was a volunteer before that. That siren's been on that pole since 1964. It goes off, people pay attention, and then everyone goes back to bed. That's how it works. People don't just pay attention. They go outside and stand in a specific direction and don't talk and don't move for exactly 11 minutes. That's not paying attention. That's a ritual." Something shifted behind his eyes. Not anger, recognition. Like I'd said a word he'd been waiting to hear, and now he knew what kind of conversation this was going to be. "Ritual," he repeated. "What would you call it?" He leaned against the bay door frame and crossed his arms. "I'd call it being respectful." "Respectful of what?" "The sound." He held my gaze for a long time. Then he said, "Go home, Mr. Dane. Take care of your family. The siren's nothing to worry about, as long as you don't make it something to worry about." I should have heard that sentence more carefully than I did. The 4th occurrence was November 19th. Same parameters. But this time something different happened. Nolan woke up. He came into our bedroom at 1:49, 2 minutes after the siren started, and he wasn't groggy. He was alert. His eyes were open and focused, and he walked straight to the window without saying anything. "Hey, buddy," I said. "It's okay. It's just a siren." He put his hand on the glass. "Nolan, come here." He didn't turn around. "What direction is that, Daddy?" "What?" "The sound. What direction is it coming from?" I didn't know how to answer that. It didn't come from a direction. It came from everywhere. "It's from the fire station, bud. Down the road." "No, it isn't," he said. And then the siren stopped, and he dropped his hand from the glass and turned around and said, "I'm thirsty," and went downstairs like nothing had happened. Celia and I looked at each other. "Kids are weird when they're half asleep," she said. He wasn't half asleep. "Marcus." He walked straight to the window. He asked what direction it was coming from. He knew it wasn't from the fire station. He's 7. He doesn't know what direction a sound comes from. I didn't argue. But I noticed that Celia had not gotten out of bed, had not gone to the window, and had not once, in 4 occurrences, shown any curiosity about the siren beyond the first night. She'd started sleeping through it, and when I mentioned it in the mornings, she'd respond the way you respond to someone complaining about a neighbor's dog, sympathetic, but fundamentally uninterested. 2 days later, I was at the grocery store and ran into the woman who lived 3 houses down from us, Miriam Caldwell. She was in her 50s, kept chickens, and had been polite to us in the way everyone in Hargrove was polite, warmly, without depth. I'd seen her standing in her yard during the last siren. I decided to try a different approach. Miriam, can I ask you something kind of strange? Sure, honey. The siren, do you go outside when it sounds? She put a can of diced tomatoes in her basket. Everybody does. Why? Because that's what you do. But what does it mean? She looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen from anyone yet. It was concern, not for herself, for me. You haven't been here very long, she said. You'll understand when you understand. It's not something I can explain by talking about it. It's something you come to feel. Feel how? Like hearing your name called from the other room. You don't decide to listen. You just do. How? How? She touched my arm, gentle, almost maternal, and went to the next aisle. I started keeping a log, dates, times, durations, what I observed. I bought a compass and stood on the porch during the 5th siren, December 3rd. Same time, same duration, and confirmed that the direction everyone faced was roughly east-northeast, toward a point on the ridge line that, as far as I could tell from topographic maps, corresponded to nothing. No structure, no trail, no landmark, just forest. I also started noticing things that had nothing to do with the siren and everything to do with the town. Hargrove didn't have arguments. I don't mean people were polite. I mean, I never witnessed a single conflict. Not at the grocery store, not at Garland's, not at the school pickup line. 14 kids in Nolan's class, and according to Mrs. Fenton, they'd had 0 behavioral incidents since the start of the year. 0. I'd worked in enough schools before going remote to know that 0 behavioral incidents in a class of 7-year-olds isn't good discipline. It's not possible. There was no graffiti. There were no potholes that stayed unfixed for more than a few days. The volunteer fire department had a fundraising thermometer painted on a plywood board outside, and it was always full, the goal always met, the community always contributing. Pete Garland told me the diner had been broken into once, in 1987, and the person who did it turned themselves in the next day. It wasn't that Hargrove was perfect. It was that Hargrove was frictionless. And once I started noticing the frictionlessness, I couldn't stop. It was like looking at a painting where the shadows all fell in different directions. Everything was beautiful. Nothing was consistent with how things actually work. Celia didn't see it, or she saw it and interpreted it as the small-town peace we'd moved here for. She was sleeping better than she had in years. Her work was going well. She'd joined a quilting group that met at the library on Wednesdays, and she talked about the women in it with genuine affection. "They're kind, Marcus," she said one evening. "Actually kind. Not performing kindness, not networking, just kind. When's the last time you were around people like that?" I couldn't answer that without sounding like a paranoid husband, so I didn't. December 14th. Nolan came home from school and told me his class had taken a field trip to the fire department. Burl Ayres had shown them the engine and let them try on helmets and sit in the cab. "Did he show you the siren?" I asked. "We weren't allowed up there. He said it's not for kids." "Did he say what it's for?" Nolan thought about it. "He said it keeps us safe. From fires? He didn't say from fires. He just said, safe. That night I went for a walk. I do my best thinking on foot, and I needed to think because I was standing on a line I recognized. On one side was the reasonable interpretation. Hargrove was a tight-knit small town with a quirky tradition, and I was a stressed-out city transplant projecting my anxiety onto my new neighbors. On the other side was the version where the siren, the standing, the facing, the frictionlessness, and the careful non-answers were all parts of the same thing, and the thing was something no one was willing to name. I walked east, toward the ridge. The road turned to gravel after the last house, then to dirt, then to a Forest Service track that was barely wider than my shoulders. I hadn't brought a flashlight, which was stupid, but the moon was nearly full and the trees were mostly bare, so enough light filtered through. I walked for about 20 minutes before I noticed the sound. Not a siren, a hum, low, steady, directionless. The kind of sound that you can't be sure you're hearing because it might just be blood in your ears. I stopped and held my breath. The hum continued. It wasn't mechanical. It didn't pulse or vary. It was more like a resonance, like the air itself was vibrating at a frequency just above the threshold of perception. I kept walking. The hum didn't get louder, but it got, and this is the only word I can think of, thicker. Like walking into increasingly humid air, except the humidity was sound. After another 10 minutes, I came to a clearing, small, maybe 50 feet across. The ground was different here. Not forest floor. The soil was bare, dark, and slightly concave, like a shallow bowl. At the center, there was nothing. I mean, there was literally nothing. No tree, no rock, no stump. Just a bare circle of dark earth with a slight depression in the middle. The hum was strongest here, but still not loud. It felt constitutional, like a property of the place, rather than a sound being generated. I stood at the edge of the clearing for 10 minutes. Nothing happened. The hum didn't change. Nothing moved. The moon lit the bare ground evenly, and the trees at the perimeter stood like the walls of a room. Eventually the cold got to me, and I walked home. I didn't tell Celia. I didn't know what I would have been telling her. The sixth siren was December 22nd, 1:47, 11 minutes, same pulse pattern. But from the window, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Pearl Ayres was in the street. Not on his property or at the fire station. In the middle of the road, walking slowly in the direction of the ridge. He was dressed in boots and a heavy jacket, and he carried nothing, no flashlight, no radio, no bag. He walked with the steady, unhurried gait of a man going somewhere familiar, and when the siren stopped, he kept walking. He didn't go back inside. He disappeared into the dark at the end of the road. The people in their yards went inside on schedule. Pearl didn't come back. At least, not while I was watching. The next morning I drove to the fire station. The bay doors were closed. I knocked on the side entrance. No answer. I tried the handle. Locked. I went to Garland's. Pete was behind the counter. You seen Pearl today? Not yet. He comes and goes. He was walking toward the forest last night, during the siren, alone. Pete poured my coffee without being asked. Set it down. Looked at me with an expression that had evolved past the casual deflection of our earlier conversations into something more direct. Marcus, can I tell you something as a friend? Sure. There are two kinds of people who move to Hargrove. There's the kind who come here because they want to stop running so hard, and there's the kind who come here because they want something to run at. You need to figure out which one you are, because this place serves one of those real well and the other one it doesn't serve at all. Which kind doesn't it serve? The kind that keeps asking questions they already know they're not going to get answered. So, there are answers. I didn't say that. I said you're not going to get them. Not from me. Not from Burl. Not from Miriam, or Gil, or anybody else. You're going to get them from the same place everyone else got them. From being here long enough. Long enough? For what? Pete picked up his rag. Finish your coffee, Marcus. Christmas came and went. Celia's parents visited for 3 days and remarked on how peaceful the town was, how good Nolan looked, how much better Celia seemed. Her father pulled me aside on the porch and said, "You made the right call, son. This is good for her." And it was. Celia was painting again, something she hadn't done since before Nolan was born. Watercolors, landscapes of the valley, the ridge, the bare winter trees. They were good. They were better than good. There was a luminosity to them that I associated with people who are genuinely, neurochemically happy. Nolan's friend Colby started coming over after school. He was a quiet kid, blonde, serious-faced. He and Nolan would play in the yard or watch something on the tablet or build things with the Lego sets Nolan got for Christmas. One afternoon I overheard them in Nolan's room. "Nolan, do you go outside when the siren goes?" Colby, "Yeah." Nolan, "What do you do?" Colby, "You just stand there." Nolan, "And then what?" Colby, "And then you go back inside." Nolan, "But what are you standing for?" A pause. Then Colby, "You know when you're listening to something and it gets to the part you really like and you just want to be still so you don't miss it? It's like that." Nolan, "But I can't hear anything. Just the siren." Colby, "You will. January 7th, 1:47, 11 minutes. I didn't go to the window. I went outside. The street was full. Not 20 people. Closer to 50. More than I'd ever seen. Standing in yards, on sidewalks, a few in the road itself, all facing east-northeast, all silent. The siren pulsed its climbing cycle over the valley, and I stood on my porch and watched my neighbors and tried to see what they were seeing, hear what they were hearing, feel what Miriam had told me I would eventually feel. I felt cold. That was it. But then Celia walked past me. She came out the front door in her robe and bare feet and walked to the middle of the yard without looking at me, without acknowledging that I was there, and she stopped and faced the ridge and was still. Celia. Nothing. Celia. She didn't turn. She didn't blink. She stood in 30-degree air, in bare feet, on frozen grass, and her face was, I need to be precise about this, her face was not blank. It was full. The way a face looks in the moment before crying or laughing, when the emotion has arrived but hasn't chosen its expression yet. She looked like she was receiving something. The siren stopped. Celia turned around, looked at me, smiled, and said, "Come back to bed, babe. It's freezing." "You were just standing in the yard barefoot." "Was I?" She looked down at her feet. "Oh, I must have been sleepwalking." "You weren't sleepwalking. You walked right past me. Your eyes were open." "Marcus, I'm cold. Come inside." She went in. I stayed on the porch until my fingers hurt. When I came to bed, she was asleep. Her feet were filthy from the yard, and she hadn't wiped them, and she didn't wake up when I cleaned them with a towel from the bathroom. The next morning, I drove to Asheville. I needed to be somewhere that didn't hum. Somewhere with traffic and noise and strangers who didn't know about the siren. I sat in a coffee shop for 2 hours and used their Wi-Fi to search for anything about Hargrove, North Carolina. That wasn't the town's own website. I found almost nothing. A mention in a 1993 Asheville Citizen-Times article about volunteer fire departments in rural Dawes County. A brief entry in a WPA guide from 1938 that described the town as a farming settlement of some 400 souls, notable for its orderliness, and the strong civic bonds among its residents. A census record showing the population had never exceeded 2,000 and never dropped below 1,500, going back to 1,920. A consistency that, for a town with no industry and no major employer, was statistically improbable. I searched for the siren, for Federal Signal Thunderbolt installations in North Carolina, for reports of unusual community behavior associated with emergency sirens. I found nothing specific to Hargrove. Then I searched for the clearing, for any geographic survey of that section of the Pisgah National Forest that might note an unusual feature, a bare area, a depression, a soil anomaly. I found a Forest Service vegetation survey from 2004 that included a data table of sample plots. Plot 7 to 14, at coordinates that roughly matched where I'd walked, had a note in the remarks column, ground cover absent. Soil characterization, anomalous mineral content, samples submitted for analysis. No follow-up, no analysis results. Just a single flag in a table of 200 plots, noticed and then not pursued. I drove home. The valley narrowed around me as I descended from the highway, and when I crossed the bridge into Hargrove, I could feel the hum again. Not hear it, feel it. A low, constant vibration that I'd been attributing to the house's old heating system, or the refrigerator, or the pipes. It wasn't any of those things. It was the ground. That evening, while Nolan was doing homework and Celia was painting in the sunroom, I went to Gil Torrance's house and knocked on his door. He opened it, saw me, and sighed. Not rudely. The way you sigh when the thing you expected to happen has happened on schedule. "Come in," he said. His house was immaculate. Sparse, organized, warm. He sat me at his kitchen table and poured 2 glasses of bourbon without asking if I wanted one. "You've been to the clearing," he said. I hadn't told anyone about the clearing. "How do you know that?" "Because you have a look. Everyone who goes up there gets the look." "What look?" "Like you found the hole in the floor of the world, and now you can't stop thinking about what's under it." He drank. I drank. The bourbon was good, and I needed it. "Gil, what is this?" He set his glass down and looked at the table for a long time. When he spoke, it was slowly, like a man choosing each word from a limited supply. "I moved here in 1991. My wife, Donna, and me. Same reasons as you, probably. Cheaper, quieter. Somewhere to just live without the noise. Took us about 4 months to notice what you've noticed. Siren, the standing, all of it. I did what you're doing. Went around asking. Got the same nothing. And eventually I stopped asking. Not because I got an answer, because I started hearing it." "Hearing what?" "Under the siren. The siren's not the thing, Marcus. The siren is the frame. It's what holds the space open, what comes through that space. That's what people are standing for." "What comes through?" Gil turned his glass on the table. 1 full rotation. "I'm not going to describe it to you because descriptions ruin it. Every person I've talked to who tried to tell somebody about it in advance, the other person either thinks they're crazy or gets scared, and both of those get in the way. You have to hear it yourself, with nothing between you and it. I've been outside during 3 sirens. I didn't hear anything. Because you were listening for something wrong. You were out there like a detective. You can't hear it if you're braced against it. It's not an attack. It's not a trick. It's..." He stopped, drank, tried again. "You know how a tuning fork works? You strike it, and anything nearby that's tuned to the same frequency starts to vibrate. The siren is the strike. The people are the forks. But you have to be tuned first. And you can't tune yourself by trying. You tune by being here. By living in this valley long enough, That whatever's in the ground gets into your, I don't know, your bones, your water, your whatever. You're describing something that changes people's bodies without their consent. I'm describing something that happened to me and that I'm grateful for every day of my life. What did you hear? I heard the valley. Not the siren, not the wind, not the woods. I heard the valley itself, the way you'd hear a person breathing if you put your ear to their chest. This place is alive, Marcus. Not metaphorically, not spiritually. The rock and the soil and the water under it, it's alive, and it has a rhythm, and the siren is how the people here sync up with that rhythm, and when you're synced, you feel things you didn't know you were missing. What things? Every living thing in this valley. The deer on the ridge, the trout in the creek, the roots under the snow. You feel them the way you feel your own heartbeat, not by thinking about it, just by being in the system. And you feel the other people, not their thoughts, their presence, their aliveness. Like everyone in Hargrove is a note in the same chord. And the clearing. Who? Gil was quiet for a moment. The clearing is where it's loudest, where the ground is thinnest, I guess you'd say, where the rhythm comes up the strongest. What made the clearing? It was there before the town, before anybody. The Cherokee had a name for it that roughly translates to the place that listens. The first white settlers avoided it. Then, sometime in the early 1900s, somebody went up there and sat in it and came back, different, better, calmer, more connected. Word spread the way it does in small places. By the 1920s, it was a known thing, even if nobody talked about it outside the valley. And the siren? The siren was Burl's grandfather's idea. 1964. Before that, people would just walk up to the clearing when they felt the pull. But it was disorganized. People going at different times, coming back at different hours, some not coming back for days. The community needed a structure for it. So they put up the siren to create a shared moment, a regular interval where everyone could sync up together without having to make the trek. The siren's frequency is tuned to match the pulse. When it sounds, the ground responds, and anyone who's acclimated can receive what the valley sends. And people who aren't acclimated, they hear a siren, they see their neighbors standing around, they ask questions nobody answers, and eventually, if they stay, the valley reaches them. If they don't stay, if they leave, they forget. Not right away, but the memory fades. People who move away from Hargrove can barely recall the siren within a year. It's not malicious. It's just incompatible. The connection doesn't survive outside the valley. Gil, my wife, is standing in the yard in her bare feet at 2 a.m, and she doesn't remember doing it. She's further along than you. Further along toward what? Toward being part of this place. She didn't choose that, didn't she? She chose to come here. She chose to stay. She sleeps well. She's painting again. She's happy. Her body is accepting something her mind hasn't caught up with yet. That's not sinister. That's how every kind of growth works. Growth doesn't usually involve blacking out in your yard. She's not blacking out. She's listening. She just hasn't built the bridge yet between the listening self and the waking self. It comes. When it came for Donna, she cried for an hour, not sad crying, the other kind. She said it was like spending your whole life hearing music through a wall, and then the wall disappears. Where's Donna now? Gil's expression didn't change, but something behind it rearranged. Donna died in 2016. Cancer. But her last 6 months, this is what I need you to hear, her last 6 months were the most peaceful months a dying person has ever had, because she could feel the valley, and the valley held her, and when she went knowing she wasn't leaving. She was joining the thing she'd spent 25 years listening to. You believe that. I know it. I feel her in the ground, Marcus. Every time the siren sounds, she's there. I finished my bourbon and sat with the silence for a long time. What happens if someone resists? I asked. Nothing happens to them. Something doesn't happen to them. They stay separate. They keep hearing just a siren. They keep living in a beautiful valley with good neighbors and clean air, and they never know what they're standing next to. Some people have lived here their whole lives and never tuned. Nobody forces it. Nobody can force it. But people pressure it. Pete, Miriam, Burl, they all steer the conversation away from direct answers. That's social control. That's privacy. Would you describe your deepest spiritual experience to a stranger who was treating it like a puzzle to solve? I didn't have a response to that. I thanked him and went home. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed next to Celia, who slept deeply and peacefully, and I stared at the ceiling and tried to organize what Gil had told me into categories: credible, possible, delusional. The problem was that the categories didn't hold. If he was delusional, the entire town shared the delusion, and shared delusions don't produce the kind of stable, multi-generational community I was living in. If he was credible, then the ground beneath my house was alive in some meaningful sense, and my wife was synchronizing with it, and my son's friend was describing the experience with the casual accuracy of a child who has never known anything. Different. January 21st, 1:47, 11 minutes. I stood on the porch. Celia came out again, robe, bare feet, eyes open, face full of that pre-expression. The street was full. Gil was in his yard, hands at his sides, head slightly tilted, looking peaceful in a way that made my chest hurt with something I couldn't name. I watched them all, and then I did something I hadn't planned. I stepped off the porch. I walked to the middle of the yard. I stood still. I faced east-northeast. I stopped trying to hear anything specific, and I just stood there, in the cold, in the siren's pulse, next to my wife, among my neighbors. For the first 8 minutes, nothing. The siren climbed and pulsed, and the air vibrated, and my teeth ached, and that was all. Then, around minute 9, the siren seemed to thin. Not get quiet, to thin, like a layer being peeled back to reveal what was underneath. And underneath was the hum I'd felt in the clearing. Except now it wasn't just a hum. It had texture. It had variation. It was not a monotone, it was a field, a spectrum, and within it I could feel, not hear, feel, individual points of warmth. Dozens of them, surrounding me, spread across the valley. Each one distinct, each one pulsing at its own rate within the larger rhythm, and I understood with a visceral certainty that I was feeling the people around me. Not their thoughts, not their emotions, but their presence. The bare biological fact of them, standing in the cold, alive, part of something. The siren stopped. The feeling vanished instantly, like a hand pulled off my skin. I gasped. Celia looked at me. "You heard it," she said. "Not a question." I felt it. She smiled. It was the most unguarded smile I'd seen from her in years. "I know." We went inside. She made tea. We sat at the kitchen table and she said, "I've been feeling it for a month. I didn't know how to tell you because I didn't think you'd believe me." "Why didn't you tell me anyway?" "Because you were already scared, and I didn't want this to be another thing you were scared of." "Marcus, it's not bad. It's the opposite of bad. It's the most real thing I've ever felt. You were standing outside in bare feet in freezing weather. You said you didn't remember. I didn't remember the first few times. Now I do. It's like waking up a muscle you didn't know you had. At first it moves without you. Then you learn to move with it. That doesn't bother you? That something moved your body before you could control it?" She wrapped both hands around her mug. "Does your heartbeat bother you? Does breathing bother you? You didn't choose either of those. Your body does them because it's alive. This is the same thing, just bigger. A bigger body. A bigger alive. I sat with that for a long time. Over the next month, two things happened simultaneously. The first was that I attended every siren February 4th, February 18th, and each time the feeling came faster, lasted longer, and resolved into greater detail. By the second time, I could distinguish individual presences among the warm points and associate them with people I knew. Gil had a steady, deep pulse, like a bass note. Miriam flickered fast, like a bird's heartbeat. Celia was a long, warm wave that I would have recognized anywhere. And the valley itself, beneath and between all the human presences, the valley was not a presence. It was a medium. It was the thing everything else was suspended in. It didn't communicate. It didn't have intentions. It was vast and slow and alive the way a glacier is alive, or an ocean current, or the magnetic field of the earth. It moved on timescales that made human life feel like a flashbulb, and the hum was not its voice. The hum was its pulse. We were bacteria on the skin of something that had a heartbeat, and somehow, through the siren, through the frequency, through the decades of attunement, the people of Hargrove had learned to feel that heartbeat and to let their own rhythms sync with it. I started sleeping better than I'd ever slept, my jaw unclenched. A knot between my shoulder blades that I'd carried for 6 years dissolved over the course of a week. I stopped checking the news obsessively. I stopped replaying arguments from 10 years ago while I drove. The ambient anxiety that had been the background radiation of my entire adult life just quieted. Not because I'd fixed anything, because I was in a context where it didn't apply. The second thing that happened was that I started noticing the cost. It was small. So small I almost missed it. But I'd spent years in Charlotte paying attention to my own mental state therapy, meditation, all the overpriced technologies of urban self-improvement, and I knew what my mind felt like from the inside, and something was different. I was losing my edge. Not my intelligence, not my memory, nothing you could measure on a test. I was losing the part of me that argued, the part that pushed back. The part that, when someone said something I disagreed with, would rise up automatically and say, "No, wait, that's not right." That part was getting quieter. I noticed it first at Garland's. Pete said something about a county commissioner I knew for a fact was wrong. A basic factual claim about a zoning issue, and I opened my mouth to correct him, and the impulse just wasn't there. Not suppressed, absent, the way you can't find a word that was on the tip of your tongue a second ago. The correction was in my mind, but the drive to deliver it had evaporated. I noticed it with Celia. She made a decision about Nolan's spring activities, signed him up for something without asking me, and the part of me that would normally have said, "Hey, we should talk about that first," didn't activate. I saw the decision. I recognized it as unilateral. I felt nothing about it. I noticed it in myself. I was writing less, thinking less critically. My work product, which had always been sharp, was becoming smooth, competent, but frictionless. I'd read back my own emails, and they were perfectly adequate and completely without personality. The frictionlessness of Hargrove was not a culture. It was a symptom. The thing in the valley, the massive, slow, living substrate that held us all in its rhythm, was not malicious. Gil was right about that. It didn't want to hurt anyone. It didn't want anything in the way that a human wants things. But it was, by its nature, a harmonic system. And harmonic systems resolve dissonance. They smooth rough edges. They pull outliers toward the mean. The reason there were no arguments in Hargrove, no behavioral incidents at the school, no graffiti, no unresolved conflicts, was not that the people were good. It was that the capacity for friction was being gently, continuously, imperceptibly filed down in anyone who stayed long enough to sink. The town wasn't peaceful. The town was polished. I tested it. I picked a fight with Celia on purpose, said something I knew would provoke her, an old sore spot about her mother. She looked at me with mild surprise and said, "That's not a very kind thing to say," and went back to painting. No heat, no counterattack, no engagement. It wasn't that she'd achieved some spiritual equanimity. It was that the machinery of conflict had been disarmed inside her, and she didn't even know it was gone. I went to Gil. "The valley takes things away," I said. He was on his porch. It was a cold March evening, and he had a blanket over his legs. He didn't deny it. "It takes the rough parts," he said. "The rough parts are what make us people. The rough parts are what make us miserable. They're the same thing, Gil. My ability to disagree, to push back, to feel angry when something's wrong, that's not a defect. That's my personality. That's who I am. Is it? Or is it what living in a world full of noise taught you to be? You came here because you were grinding your teeth to dust. Your wife came here because she'd stopped creating. Your son came here because you wanted him to grow up without a cop in his cafeteria. You wanted the rough parts filed down, the valleys just doing what you asked for. I didn't ask for my wife to lose her ability to argue with me. Did you like arguing with her? That's not the point. It's exactly the point. You're not upset that something's been taken. You're upset that you don't miss it. That's what really scares you, that the loss feels like relief. He was right. That was exactly what scared me. March 15th, Nolan's birthday. He turned 8. Celia baked a cake, and 6 kids from his class came over, and they ran around the yard and ate too much sugar and did everything kids are supposed to do at a birthday party. But I watched Nolan, and I saw something that I couldn't explain away. He didn't compete. Not with Colby, not with any of the other kids. They played games that should have had winners and losers, races across the yard, a scavenger hunt I'd set up, and there was no winner and no loser, because no child pushed to be first. They ran at the same speed. They found things at the same rate. Not because they were holding back, but because the impulse to surge ahead, to beat the others, to be the one who wins it, wasn't there. My son was becoming frictionless. At 7 at 8, before his personality had even fully formed, the valley was smoothing him into something cooperative and calm and gentle and absolutely, fundamentally incomplete. I found Berlairs. He was at the fire station, finally, doing maintenance on the engine. I walked in, and I didn't ask politely. "The siren isn't a frame," I said. "It's a file. It's grinding us down." Burl kept working on the engine, didn't look at me. "You talked to Gil." "Gil thinks this is a gift. Gil's been here 35 years. He's the happiest man I know. Gil's the most diminished man I know. And he can't tell the difference, because the part of him that could tell the difference is the part that got taken." Burl put down his wrench, stood up, looked at me with an expression that was, for the first time since I'd met him, completely open. "You think I don't know?" he said. I stared at him. "I'm the one who sounds the siren, Marcus, every time. 1:47 in the morning. I come down here and I flip the switch and I hold it for 11 minutes and then I turn it off. I've been doing it since my father died in 2009. He did it from 1983, and his father did it from 1964. 3 generations of my family, keeping the schedule. Why that time? Why 11 minutes? Because that's what works. The pulse from the clearing peaks between 1 and 3 a.m., something to do with tidal forces, probably, or the rotation of the Earth, or something we don't have the science for. 1:47 is the center of the peak. 11 minutes is how long the siren needs to run to open the channel fully. My grandfather figured that out by trial and error. And you just keep doing it. And I keep doing it because I've seen what happens when it stops. He sat on the engine's running board, rubbed his face with both hands. 1996. I was 22. My father missed a sounding-only time in 30 years. He had pneumonia, could barely stand, and I was in Raleigh at school and didn't know the schedule yet. He figured one missed session wouldn't matter. What happened? Next morning, 2 domestic violence calls. First ones in 6 years. A fistfight at the gas station. 3 dogs attacked a kid on Elm Street, dogs that had never bitten anyone. Mrs. Carson, who was 91 and had been sharp as a razor, woke up confused and walked into the creek and nearly drowned. One missed siren. One missed siren. The sink broke. Not all the way one night isn't enough for that, but enough. Like a skipped heartbeat. The whole town stuttered. It took 3 sessions to smooth back out. So the siren isn't optional. The siren is the minimum. Without it, the valley's pulse and the people's rhythms drift apart, and when they drift, everything the sink was suppressing comes back. Not gradually. Fast. The roughness, the conflict, the fear, the violence, it doesn't trickle back, it floods. You're saying the siren is holding back a flood. I am saying the siren is holding back the natural human condition. And if you want to call that a flood, go ahead. I've seen it, and it looked like one. I sat with him in the engine bay for a long time. The fluorescent lights buzzed. Outside, Hargrove was quiet. What about the clearing? I said. The clearing is the source. The pulse comes from there, deep, deeper than anyone's dug. My grandfather tried once, dug down about 12 feet, and hit something he said felt like hitting the surface of a drum. Solid, but resonant. He could feel it vibrating through the shovel. He filled the hole back in and never dug again. What is it? I don't know. Nobody knows. Could be geological, could be something else. My grandfather called it the heart. Not because he thought the valley was an organism, he was a practical man, but because the rhythm felt cardiac to him. Systolic. Like the earth was pumping something. And the sink, the thing people feel during the siren, that's just proximity to the pulse. Proximity and attunement. The siren is tuned to the pulse's dominant frequency. When people stand in it long enough, their autonomic systems start to entrain. Heart rate, breathing, brainwave patterns, they all converge. Not immediately, takes months. But once you're entrained, you're part of the network, and the network smooths you out, whether you want it to or not. Burl looked at me. You felt it. I know you did. Was it bad? No. Was it the best thing you've ever felt? I didn't answer. That's the trap, he said. That's why my family keeps sounding the siren, even though we know what it does. Because stopping it is worse. Because the flood is worse than the filing. Because given the choice between a town full of slightly diminished people who never hurt each other and a town full of complete people who do, I choose the filing. My father chose it. His father chose it. And every morning after, I hate myself a little more for making a choice that doesn't feel like mine anymore. It doesn't feel like yours, because you've been filed too. Yeah, I know. That's the trap, Marcus. You can see the trap and you still can't get out of it, because getting out means pulling 1,800 people out with you, and you can't do that without letting the flood in first. And the flood will hurt people. Real people. Kids. Mrs. Carson. Your son. My son is losing the ability to compete, to fight, to be selfish the way a kid needs to be selfish to learn who he is. Your son is safe. Your son is happy. Your son will grow up in a town where nobody will ever bully him or hurt him or make him feel like he doesn't belong. My son will grow up in a town where nobody can. Burl didn't answer that. I went home. Celia was in the sunroom, painting. The painting was a landscape of the valley at dusk, and it was beautiful, and every painting she'd done since we moved here was beautiful in exactly the same way, and I realized that was the problem. There was no variation, no risk, no ugly painting that fails in an interesting way. Her work had become technically perfect and emotionally uniform, because the part of her that would have made something jarring or difficult or truly original had been smoothed into the same warm, round shape as everything else in Hargrove. I sat down across from her. Celia, I need to tell you something, and I need you to actually hear it. She put her brush down, looked at me with open, gentle attention. This town is changing us, not metaphorically, physically. The ground, the valley, it's alive in some way, and the siren synchronizes us with it, and the synchronization is making us calmer, happier, and less ourselves. It's filing down everything in us that creates friction. I can feel it happening, and I want to leave. She listened to all of it. She didn't interrupt. She didn't argue. And when I finished, she said, with genuine warmth and absolutely no heat, "That's not what's happening, Marcus. What's happening is that you're relaxing for the first time in your life, and it feels scary because you've always associated tension with being alive. But tension isn't aliveness. It's just tension. That's what the filing sounds like from the inside, or it's what healing sounds like from the outside. I couldn't tell the difference. That was the point. The filing removed the ability to tell the difference, and once it was gone, every argument against the filing sounded like fear, and every argument for it sounded like reason, and there was no external standard to appeal to, because everyone in Hargrove had already been filed, and everyone outside Hargrove would think I was insane. April 1st, 1:47. I didn't go outside. I lay in bed and put in earplugs and pulled a pillow over my head. The siren penetrated all of it, not as sound as vibration, through the mattress, through the frame, through the foundation. The pulse climbed through my body, and I felt the network open, and I felt every person in the valley light up like nodes in a web, and I felt Celia beside me join them, and I felt Nolan in the next room join them, and I felt the valley itself, enormous, ancient, patient, in a way that had nothing to do with waiting and everything to do with scale. I felt it hold them all, hold everyone, and the warmth was indescribable. And the loss was indescribable, and they were the same thing. When the siren stopped, I pulled the pillow off my head, and I was crying. Not sad crying, not happy crying, the kind of crying that comes when you understand something you wish you didn't. The valley wasn't evil. It wasn't a monster. It wasn't a parasite or a predator. It was a system, an ancient, geological, possibly pre-biological system that produced a field of harmonic influence, and humans who lived inside that field long enough became entrained, and the entrainment felt like wholeness, and the cost of that wholeness was the gradual loss of everything that makes wholeness worth having: your edges, your opinions, your capacity for wrongness, the parts of you that are ugly and selfish and stubborn and yours. The valley was offering communion, real communion, not a metaphor, a dissolution of boundaries between self and environment, self and others, self and the deep, humming aliveness of the earth. And the price was self. I spent 2 days after that in a state I can only describe as philosophical freefall. I went to work, made dinner, talked to Nolan, lay next to Celia, and all of it felt like performing a play while the theater burned around me. I was trying to decide, and the decision felt impossible because the mechanism I was deciding about was the same mechanism I was deciding with. Was I resisting because I was right, or because I was the last rough edge, and rough edges resist by nature? Was the valley smoothing a violation? Or was my insistence on keeping my friction a violation of the community that had already chosen otherwise? And underneath all of it, was I willing to take my wife and son out of the happiest place they'd ever been, back to the grinding, anxious, competitive world that had driven us here, in order to protect an idea of selfhood that they might not even want? April 10th. I packed a bag, not for all of us, for me. One bag, one car, a plan to drive to Asheville and stay in a motel and think clearly for the first time in months, away from the hum, away from the field, away from the pulse that was even now, in the middle of the afternoon, pressing gently against the underside of my awareness like a hand on a door. Celia found me in the bedroom with the bag half full. "Where are you going?" "I need a few days." "Why?" "Because I can't think straight here. I need to be somewhere. The ground isn't alive." She sat on the bed. "Marcus, you're scaring me." "Good. That means you can still be scared. That means you haven't lost everything yet." "I haven't lost anything." "You've lost your anger. You've lost your stubbornness. You've lost the part of you that would have yelled at me for packing a bag without talking to you first. The Celia I married would be furious right now. You're just concerned." She looked at me, and for a moment, a brief, flickering moment, I saw something behind her eyes that might have been the old Celia, the one who fought and burned and slammed doors and was difficult and brilliant and fully, irreducibly herself. And then it passed, like a cloud shadow on a field, and she said, "If you need to go, go. We'll be here when you come back." I drove out of the valley, and the hum faded, and my jaw clenched, and my shoulders tightened, and the radio was too loud, and the traffic on the highway was infuriating. And by the time I reached Asheville, I was exactly the man I'd been before Hargrove: anxious, sharp, grinding, and mine. I checked into a motel. I sat on the bed, and I felt the absence of the field like a phantom limb. Not pain absence, a silence where the warm hum had been. I was alone in my body in a way I hadn't been in months, and it was terrible, and it was me. I stayed for 4 days. Each day the absence got easier, and the memories of the feeling got harder to access. By the third day, I couldn't quite remember what the network felt like. I knew the facts of it, but the felt sense was fading, like trying to recall the exact sensation of a dream. Gil had said the memory doesn't survive outside the valley. He was right. On the 4th day, I called Celia. "I want to come get you and Nolan," I said. "I want us to leave Hargrove." Silence on the line. Then, "Nolan and I are happy here. You're entrained. There's a difference." "I don't feel a difference." "That's the point, Celia. The whole point. The filing takes the part that would feel the difference." More silence. Then, "Come home and we'll talk." "I can't talk about this there. The field makes it impossible to." "Marcus, come home." Her voice was warm, gentle, loving, and absolutely, unmovably certain. I sat in that motel room for 6 hours. I called a therapist in Asheville and described the situation in purely psychological terms. My wife and son were very happy in a new town, and I was having intrusive thoughts that their happiness was artificial. The therapist said it sounded like I was struggling with adjustment and possibly experiencing mild paranoia related to the loss of familiar stressors. She recommended that I go home, re-engage with my community, and consider whether my resistance to happiness was a pattern worth examining. She wasn't wrong. From the outside, that's exactly what this looked like. From the outside, I was a man who had moved to paradise and was trying to burn it down because paradise didn't feel enough like the hell he was used to. I drove back. The moment I crossed the bridge into the valley, the hum returned. Not gradually, instantly, like stepping into a warm room from the cold. My jaw unclenched. My shoulders dropped. My heartbeat slowed. And I felt, God help me, I felt relief. Celia was on the porch. Nolan was in the yard with Colby. The house was warm, and the dinner she'd made was good, and Nolan showed me a drawing he'd done of the valley at night, with little dots for all the people standing in their yards. And the dots were connected by lines, and the lines all led to a central point that he'd colored with every crayon he had, layer on layer, until the paper was thick and waxy and almost three-dimensional. "What's this?" I asked, pointing to the center. "That's the heartbeat," he said. He said it the way he'd say, "That's a tree," or "That's the sun." A fact, uncontested. I put him to bed that night and stood in his doorway and watched him fall asleep, and I felt the valley holding him like it held everyone, and I thought, he will grow up here, and he will be kind and calm and cooperative, and he will never fight for anything, because the fighting will have been smoothed out of him before he knew he had it, and he will be happy in a way that I will never be able to prove isn't real, and the proof that it isn't real is something the valley has already taken from me once and will take again if I stay. April 15th. Siren. 1:47. 11 minutes. I stood in the yard with my family. I felt the network. I felt the valley. I felt every person in Hargrove synchronized into a single vast warm chord, and within that chord I felt my own note rough, discordant, the one frequency that didn't quite match, and I felt the valley's pulse pressing against it, not aggressively, not impatiently, just steadily, the way water presses against a stone. And I understood that the stone always loses, always. Given enough time, the water always wins, and the stone becomes sand, and the sand becomes part of the riverbed, and the riverbed doesn't remember being a stone. I felt that, and I felt how good it would be to stop being a stone. The siren stopped. Celia went inside. Nolan went inside. Gil waved from his yard. Miriam's porch light went off. I stood in the yard alone. That was 4 days ago. I'm writing this in the kitchen at 3 in the morning. Celia is asleep. Nolan is asleep. The valley hums beneath the floor. I have not made a decision. I need to say that clearly, because the rest of what I say might sound like one. I have not decided to stay, and I have not decided to leave. I am standing in the space between those two things, and the space is shrinking not because anyone is pushing me, but because the stone is getting smaller. Here is what I know. If I take my family and leave, we will lose the connection. The memory will fade. Celia will become unhappy again, slowly, in the old ways. Nolan will enter a school system that will teach him to compete and compare and perform and grind. I will go back to clenching my jaw and replaying arguments and lying awake, calculating whether I've done enough. We will be fully ourselves. We will be miserable. If I stay, we will lose the selves that would be miserable. The valley will file us into its cord, and we will feel every living thing in the valley, and we will never fight again, and our son will grow up in a place that holds him, and we will be happy in a way that no one outside this valley will ever believe is real. And the part of us that would question that happiness will be the first thing filed away, and we will not miss it, because you cannot miss what you cannot remember having. Both of those are true. Both of those are the full picture. And I cannot choose between them because the choice requires the exact faculty that one option preserves and the other erases. Burl sounds the siren in 2 days. He will stand at the switch at 1:47 and hold it for 11 minutes, and the valley will pulse, and the people will stand, and the chord will sound, and my rough note will be in it, a little smoother than last time, a little closer to the key. I keep thinking about something Nolan's friend Colby said. You know when you're listening to something, and it gets to the part you really like, and you just want to be still so you don't miss it. It's like that. He's 9 years old. He's been in the chord his entire life. He's never had a rough edge. He doesn't know what a rough edge is. He is the kindest, most gentle, most perfectly agreeable child I have ever met, and there is nothing in him that would ever fight back against anything, and he is happy, and I cannot tell if that is a tragedy or an aspiration. Celia's paintings are still beautiful, still identical. She started a new one yesterday, the valley at dawn this time, and I watched her work, and I searched her face for the woman who used to get furious when a painting wasn't going right, who would scrape the canvas and start over and swear and pour a glass of wine and try again with something reckless and ugly that sometimes became the best thing she'd ever made. That woman is gone. The woman who replaced her is calm and productive and content, and her paintings are lovely, and they will never be great, and she will never know the difference. The siren is in 2 days. I can feel the valley beneath me right now. The hum is constant, but it intensifies at night, and if I'm quiet and still, I can feel the individual presences of my neighbors not as distinct as during the siren, but there, like candles seen through fog. Gil is awake. Burl is awake. Miriam is asleep, but her presence pulses softly, and beneath all of them, beneath the houses and the roads and the frozen ground, the ancient rhythm continues, and it is beautiful, and it is erasing me, and I don't know what to do. I keep rereading this, and I notice my own writing getting smoother as I go. The early paragraphs have more edges, more verbs, more friction. The later paragraphs flow. Underquote. I don't know if that's fatigue or the field. I don't know if I'll be able to tell the difference by morning. If you're reading this and you've never heard of Hargrove, North Carolina, you won't find it easily. It's not on most maps. The people there are not in danger. They're not suffering. If you drove through, you'd see a beautiful little town full of kind people in a quiet valley, and you'd think, why can't everywhere be like this? And you'd be right to think that, and you'd be wrong. And the distance between right and wrong is exactly the width of everything I'm about to lose. The hum is getting louder, or I'm getting quieter. I don't know which. Nolan just called out from his room. Not a nightmare, he said. Daddy, can you feel it tonight? It's really strong. I can feel it. I can feel all of it, and less of me objects.